Good morning, everyone. Thank you for give me the privilege of being in your homes today. And I hope you're well. And I also hope that if you're not well, that you know that there's people that are here that love you and care for you. And if you need someone to pray with you or to chat through some stuff, please make yourself known to us. This morning I would love to look at a few verses in Colossians chapter 3. These are verses that Amy actually led us through for our day of prayer on Wednesday. They had been verses that had been reflected on at the beginning of the week. Shared some thoughts with the men on Tuesday night. So whenever we used these same verses to help us to facilitate our time of prayer on Wednesday, I felt that it would be a good place for us to continue to look at today. So Colossians chapter 3 verse 12 to 17. Let me read these few verses. They are, in many ways, they are self-explanatory. They're Paul's pep talk, or his rallying cry to the people in Colossae. But let me read these few verses, and then just briefly set it in the context of its day. Okay, so Colossians 3 verse 12 to 17. Again, hopefully you have your physical Bible at hand as we read these verses together. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive whatever grievances you may have against one another. Forgive as the Lord forgave you, and over all these virtues put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another with all wisdom, and as you sing psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. And whatever you do, whether in word or deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. I hope that God blesses the reading of his word. So we're in this city of Colossae, and Epaphras, who is a member of Paul's apostolic team that he sends from city to city, teaching and bringing the good news of Jesus. And it's Epaphras who went back to his home city and brought this incredible news of the life, the death, the resurrection of Jesus, and what that now means for these people living in this city. And we're told at the beginning, in the first chapter, that they heard and understood the message of grace. They heard and understood the message of grace. And at the beginning of this chapter, Paul is encouraging them because he's heard stories of them growing in faith. He's heard stories of them growing in love for one another. He's heard about the hope that has been springing up as they've lived out in response to the message of grace. But the reason why he's found himself penning this letter is in response to false teachers who have come in and started to mess with their minds. They've been set free from what had held them in bondage, what had held them in captivity. They've been set free from it, and now there's these false teachers who come in to try to bring them back into a form of captivity. Try and bring them back, because there's people and even today, people still can't grasp amazing grace. They can't grasp scandalous grace, and for people it sounds too good to be true, and that's right. It is. It's too good to be true. And these people, because it was too good to be true, they dismissed it, couldn't believe it. And they were coming in contradicting the story of amazing grace. And so the people that had responded and heard and understood were beginning to take on board some of the things that they were being told. They began to believe the lies. They began to think some wrong thoughts, and Paul sent this letter, deeply compassionate. It says, I would encourage you to read through the whole letter. Catch Paul's heart as he is trying to encourage these brothers and sisters in this city. And Paul sends this letter. He's wanting to remind them who they are. But in the first chapter, especially from verse 15 to the end of chapter 1, we see Paul reminding them first of all who Jesus is. Guys, get your eyes fixed on Jesus. Before I give any instruction, you just need to fix your eyes once again on Jesus. Get your eyes back on Him. And then these incredible words that he pens. He is speaking of Jesus. He's the image of the invisible God. By Him all things were created. All things are held together by Him. He has supremacy in everything. He is reconciling all things to Himself, making peace through His sacrifice on the cross. And I think as Paul reminds them of who they are, he reminds them of Jesus. He reminds them, get them to fix their eyes on Jesus. It feels like this is a real remedy for restlessness. And that's what it's felt like for me and maybe many others, maybe some of you listening right now, that your remedy for restlessness would just be being reminded of who you are, and more importantly, who Jesus is. He's the image of the invisible God. All things are being held together by Him. He has supremacy over everything. He is reconciling. He's not inactive right now. He is reconciling all things to Himself, making peace through the blood, through His sacrifice, through His victory. And I think I've felt the weight of some of Paul's words this week, because Paul's words are coming to us from prison. Paul's words were coming to these brothers and sisters in this city from a place of lockdown. And they were coming from a place of lockdown to a people who needed reminded to hold on, who needed to be reminded to stand firm, who needed to be reminded to lift your eyes. Brothers and sisters, lift up your heads. Last week, as we went through the Psalms of Lament, Christina read for us Psalm 130. It's one of those Psalms in between 120 and 135 that are the Song of Ascents. And in Psalm 121 and 123, we have the psalmist saying, I lift up my eyes. Where does my help come from? It comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. I lift up my eyes. I lift my eyes up. I need to lift my head. And I think Paul was doing that. Paul, in a place of lockdown, was reminding a people to set their minds on things above, to lift up your heads, to lift up your eyes, to set your mind on things that are above, because that's where you are rightfully seated. That's where you should be. That's what Jesus has done. That's what you need to be reminded of. You have been raised with Christ. So set your hearts there. Set your hearts on things that are above, where Christ is seated. Set your minds there. Lift up your eyes. Lift up your heads. Set your mind on things that are above, not on earthly things. For the old way is gone. Your old life, you've died, but your life now is hidden with Christ in God. These are a people that needed to be reminded that needed to be reminded to hold on. And Paul writes to them from his place of lockdown. And his words are, we can't even come back, we can't even shoot back to Paul and say, Paul, you don't understand. You don't understand the moment that we're in right now. Paul understood well. He understood all too well what it is like to find yourself in a place of isolation. What it's like to find yourself in a place of complete lockdown. And so Paul's words, for me, it feels like they're coming with extra weight for us. To us who need to be reminded to lift up our eyes. Need to be reminded to stand firm. Need to be reminded who we are and where we sit. Because of Jesus. Because of what Jesus has done. And so it's chapter 3. There's so much richness that we could explore together throughout this letter. But chapter 3, Paul, he, in light of where you are seated, and as he encourages us to lift up our eyes, lift up your heads, he then says, right, get rid of that old self. Get rid of the old self. Put it to death. Strong language, but at times like this it needs strong language. Put it to death. Put to death the things that are destroying you. Put to death the things that are leading to destruction. And as the chapter goes on, I think it's fair to say, especially those things that destroy relationships. Of course, destroy relationships with God, but as we can see in these verses, things that destroy relationships with one another. And so he's telling us to get rid of those things that destroy relationships between one another. Get rid of the things that cause you to be angry. Get rid of that malice and that nasty way that you talk about people. Like, get rid of that. That's your old self. That's the way that you once lived. Don't get sucked back into it. Don't allow this pivotal moment that you're now in to suck you back into that old way. Put that old self to death and put on the new self. You're a new creation. And we're 2 weeks out now from Resurrection Sunday. 2 weeks ago is when we were celebrating Easter. And we talked about how that what Jesus was doing was restoring his original design. So we are, because of what Jesus has done, we are a new creation. We are a new creation. The old is gone and the new has come. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And he goes on in these few verses to put on the new self in verse 10 of chapter 3. Put on the new self. Do you know that is a doing word? That is a verb. This homeschooling is as rewarding for me as it is, I hope, for the kids. I'm reminding myself of nouns and verbs and adjectives. And this is a verb. This is a doing word. Put on the new self. And I point that out because it's an intentional act. It's an intentional act. It's something that isn't going to automatically happen. We need to intentionally lift up our eyes, intentionally fix our eyes on Jesus, and intentionally put on the new self. And so Paul begins to talk about what that looks like. He begins to tell us what we need to put on. He begins to point out this new wardrobe. Feels like I don't know whether it's the sun or what it is. Maybe something that Judith is. It's all Judith's good cooking, but it feels like they're all growing incredibly quickly over the last couple of weeks. And several times Judith has told me that they're all in need of new clothes. And they need a new wardrobe. But to get back to these verses, this is what our new wardrobe looks like. It looks like being clothed with compassion and kindness and humility and gentleness and patience. These are key. They really don't need me to expound too much further on them. This compassion, this deep feeling. Like this, our English cannot grasp fully what word is used here. This is a deep, feeling in the pits of our stomach, overwhelming feeling towards others, deep compassion, kindness, and humility. We need to clothe ourselves with humility. We need to clothe ourselves with gentleness and patience. See, these are always things that we need to clothe ourselves with. But I think for me, they are an important reminder what to clothe ourselves with in the moment that we are currently living through. And Paul says, over all of these virtues, over them all put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. Eugene Peterson in the Message version says, put on love. It's the all-purpose garment. Never be without it. And the Greek word that is used here is the word agape. And we read this book over Katie regularly. It's a book that was given to us by a good friend, and the last page in her book tells us about God's never stopping, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. It gives a bit of a snapshot into this agape type of love. And that is the type of love that we are being encouraged to put on. The type of love that is never going to stop, that is never going to give up. It's never going to quit on people. It's going to be resolute. It's going to be standing firm. And so as we look to Jesus, we fix our eyes on him, and be reminded, as verse 12 tells us, that it's like, Paul, come on guys, as God's chosen people, therefore as God's chosen people who are dearly loved, who are dearly agape, you have been loved with this love, with this never stopping, never failing, never giving up, unbreaking, always and forever love. And so in response to catching a glimpse again of Jesus, being reminded of who you are as his chosen, dearly loved people, well then you put on compassion and imitate him. Put on kindness and imitate him. Put on humility, took on the nature of a servant, went as low as he could possibly go. That's what he's asking us to put on. And it's love, it's this agape love that'll hold all of that together. It's the glue that holds all of these other things together. And then he goes on in verse 15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. I've been interested, I've come across it now, it feels like I've come across it 2 or 3 times over the last couple of weeks. I suppose when it comes to the idea of peace, a lot of speakers, a lot of preachers are scouring through the Bible to find where is it that we can find peace? Where are the keys to peace? And so in Colossians 3 verse 15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. This idea of rule, the original meaning of it was to be umpire, to be the umpire. So if you're familiar with tennis or one of those sports that has an umpire in it, the umpire has the last call, and there's moments of conflict, if there's moments of uncertainty, the umpire rules. The umpire makes the final decision. This is maybe better ways of fleshing this out, But there will be moments, and I'm sure there's been moments this week, where there is conflict, there is moments of uncertainty. You're left with a choice whether you respond in the old self with anger and frustration, or you respond with the new self, with compassion and humility. And so the encouragement to us is that let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Let the peace of Christ make the final call. The peace of Christ is going to rule in the favour of compassion and humility. So your experience of the peace of Jesus, the experience of peace, would determine the decisions that you make, would determine your heart response to moments of conflict, to moments of tension, even just internally and with one another. And be thankful. So much it feels of what we're saying here is so countercultural to where we're at. How beautiful it would be. How much would our communities and our families and our neighbours take note when the people are living so counterculturally to what's going on around us. Be thankful. And it's been said that when there is peace in the heart, there will be praise on the lips. And so the call to be thankful is really important. That the peace of Christ rule. Be thankful. Let his word dwell in you richly. On Thursday night we looked at the 5th discipline of 12 that we're going through, and 7 o'clock every Thursday night. And we looked at solitude, and I would encourage you to pick up some of those things that we were talking about. If you didn't want to listen to the whole service or the whole talk, don't feel that you have to do that. If you want the notes on that, please get in touch. I'd be more than happy to send them to you. But the idea of solitude is just to find yourself in a place where you can hear the whisper of God. So we're desperate. We really want to hear the word of the Lord. We want to hear the word of Jesus. We want it to dwell in us richly. And so these are really good instructions, really helpful instructions for us from Paul in prison, in a place of lockdown, to a people who needed to be reminded: hold on, stand firm, stay strong, clothe yourself with all of this stuff. And he goes on to talk about singing. Please sing. And people have been doing that. I know that has been really helpful for many. Just to worship. Just to find themselves in a place where they're singing songs of adoration. Singing songs of worship with gratitude in their hearts to God, as Paul says in verse 16. Sing. Keep on singing. Sing psalms, sing hymns, sing spiritual songs with gratitude in your hearts to God. Whatever you do, whether it's in word or in deed, do it all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. And I don't even want to say they seem like basic instructions, because we don't always, if they're that basic, we'll be living them out all the time. And I know for me, I certainly am not. I need to be reminded of these things today, and I hope you do, and I hope that they're helpful. I hope it's a helpful place for you to turn to today. As I said at the beginning, I'd encourage you to read through Paul's letter to this church. And I love that Paul, of all that was going on in the city, the fact that the people were beginning to walk away, that they were beginning to wonder. Paul didn't come with any sense of condemnation. He didn't come with any rebuke. Like he made himself clear, but he expressed himself with love. He wanted to remind them of the good things that he still heard. He wanted to remind them of Jesus. He wanted to remind them of what it was to take on this new self, to be this new creation. And he reminded them of that and continues to give them really helpful advice right to the close of his letter. And at the end of his letter, in verse 18 of chapter 4, he says, remember my chains. Remember where I am writing this from. I'm writing it from a place of lockdown. And I'm writing it because you need to hear it. You need to hear, don't walk away from this amazing grace. Don't walk away from this never stopping, never giving up, unbreakable, always and forever love. Lift up your eyes, set your mind on what's above. And when you've done that, then it's on you to clothe yourself. To clothe yourself in right relationship with God in order to maintain, develop, grow in relationship with one another. So keep on encouraging one another, keep on loving one another, keep on forgiving one another, as Paul has reminded us in these verses as well. Maintain strong relationship with God. Maintain and continue to develop strong relationship with one another. It's evidence that we're clothed in this new self. And again, whatever you do, whatever you're saying, whatever you're doing, do it for Jesus. Do it for him. He's worthy of it all. So as you go about your day today, I'd encourage you to be thankful. Sing songs of worship, sing songs of adoration. Lift up your eyes, church, lift up your heads. Where does our help come from? It comes from our Maker. It comes from the one who holds all things together. So Father, I thank you that you are the image of God. Thank you that all things are held together in you. Thank you that in you everything has its supremacy in you. Thank you that you're reconciling all things to yourself. You are continuing to make peace. And we continue to ask that your peace would be so present among us right now. The peace of Jesus would rule our hearts. It would have the final decision. When we're wrestling, when we're anxious, the peace of Christ, would you rule? You come and rule in our hearts. God, would you meet with us where we are right now? I pray that we would encounter your love. We would encounter your agape love. We would encounter your amazing grace in such a way that it would free us, in such a way that it would liberate us, in such a way that it would impact our relationships with those around us. We love you, Lord. Bless us today. In Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Bless you all. Have a good day. Chat soon.